I spent 30 years memorizing the geometry of my husband's moods. I knew the angle of his chin when he was lying, and the specific weight of his silence when he was disappointed. But I never expected to learn the sound of my own bones snapping on a rainy Tuesday in October. It wasn't just the physical impact that broke me. It was the way Claire, my best friend of 2 decades, looked at me while I lay on the kitchen tile, with a cold, clinical pity that tasted like iron. They thought they had buried me in that silence, assuming my ribs would simply knit back together around a secret too heavy to carry. They didn't realize that a woman who has lost everything has nothing left to fear. If you've ever felt like a ghost in your own home, or if you've seen the person you love look at someone else with the warmth they used to reserve for you, please subscribe and like this video. Your support helps these stories of resilience reach those who need them most. Comment, "I need to know what happened," to help me share the rest of this journey. How much can a heart endure before it stops beating for others and starts beating for itself? The air in the house always felt thinner in the mornings, as if Julian were breathing more than his fair share of it. I stood at the kitchen island, my movements slow and deliberate. Every breath was a calculated risk. If I inhaled too deeply, the sharp, jagged heat in my side would flare, a reminder of the fall Julian told the paramedics about. "You really should be more careful with those silk socks on the hardwood, Elena," he had said to the doctor, his hand resting with a heavy, performative tenderness on my shoulder. I had nodded. I had even managed a small, sheepish smile. That is the labor of a wife, to validate the lie that keeps the peace. Today was Tuesday. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. Julian was in his study, likely working, though I knew the rhythm of his productivity, and this wasn't it. The silence from that room was too focused, too rhythmic. I moved to the sink to wash the breakfast dishes, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the porcelain. My best friend Claire was coming over at 11. She had been coming over every Tuesday for years. We called it our sanctuary hour. We would drink Earl Grey, talk about the community garden, and complain about the slow creep of age. She was the woman who had held my hand at my mother's funeral, and the one who had helped me pick out the wallpaper for the nursery 30 years ago. She was the sister I chose. When the doorbell rang, the sound vibrated through my chest, sending a dull throb to my fractured ribs. I took a shallow breath, adjusted my cardigan to ensure the bruising was well hidden, and opened the door. Claire stood there, looking effortless in a cream-colored trench coat. She held a small bouquet of hydrangeas, my favorite. Or, at least they used to be. Now, the sight of them felt like an insult, a beautiful shroud for something rotting. "Elena, darling," she said, stepping inside and brushing her cheek against mine. She smelled of expensive vanilla and something sharp, like ozone. "How are you feeling? Julian told me you had another dizzy spell. Honestly, you need to start taking your iron supplements." "I'm managing, Claire," I said, my voice steady, though my throat felt like it was lined with glass. "The house is just big. Sometimes I lose my footing." We sat in the sunroom, the light spilling across the floral rug I'd spent 6 months saving for back in the 90s. Julian joined us 5 minutes later, his face transforming from the cold mask he wore when we were alone into the beaming, successful architect the world knew. "Claire, you must sight for sore eyes," Julian said, leaning down to kiss her cheek, a fraction of a second too long, a movement a fraction of a degree too familiar. "Just checking on our patient," Claire replied, her eyes flitting to mine for a brief, flickering second before returning to his face. "She's stubborn, Julian. You know how she is." "Tell me about it," Julian chuckled, sitting in the armchair opposite us. "I keep telling her to slow down, but she acts like the world will stop spinning if she isn't scrubbing a baseboard." I watched them. I sat there, the invisible anchor of the room, and I watched the way their knees almost touched. I watched the way Julian's thumb traced the rim of his teacup in a way that mimicked the way he used to touch my hand when we were dating. It was a language of micro-movements, a secret dialect spoken right in front of me, under the assumption that I had grown too dull to translate it. "The anniversary party is only 3 weeks away," Claire said, her voice bright, shifting the topic with practiced ease. 35 years, Elena. Can you believe it? We have to make it perfect. I've already spoken to the caterer about the sea bass. 35 years, I repeated. The words felt heavy, like stones in my mouth. "I don't know what I'd do without Claire's help," Julian said, looking at her with an intensity that made the air in the room feel heavy. "She's been a godsend during this difficult time." He meant my clumsiness. He meant the fact that I was no longer the vibrant hostess who could manage a 3-course meal without flinching. "I'm sure," I said softly. I looked down at my tea. A small, dark speck was floating in the amber liquid, a piece of tea leaf. It looked like a drowning insect. I thought about the night of the fall. I hadn't tripped. I had walked into Julian's office without knocking because I thought I heard him sobbing. I had found him on his phone, his face flushed, speaking words to Claire that he hadn't spoken to me in a decade. When I had gasped, just a small, involuntary sound, he hadn't looked guilty. He had looked enraged. He had stood up, his chair screeching against the floor, and he had pushed me. Not a shove, but a hard, focused strike to the chest to get me out of his space. I had hit the edge of the mahogany desk, and the world had gone white. "Elena, you're a million miles away." Claire's voice broke through the memory. She was leaning forward, her hand resting on my knee. Her touch felt like a burn. "Just thinking about the guest list," I lied. "I want to make sure everyone who matters is there." "Of course," Julian said, his eyes narrowing slightly, searching my face for a crack in the porcelain. "Everyone who matters will be there. It's going to be a night to remember." I looked at him, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't feel the need to look away first. I let the silence stretch, long and uncomfortable, until Julian shifted in his seat and cleared his throat. "I should get back to the blueprints," he said, standing up. "Claire, stay as long as you like. Keep her company." When he left the room, the atmosphere didn't lighten. It curdled. Claire stayed for another hour, talking about the decorations, the flowers, the music. She talked about my life as if she were the architect of it, and I was just the tenant. I didn't tell her that I had found the hidden folder on Julian's backup drive. I didn't tell her that I had spent the last 3 nights, while they thought I was sedated with painkillers, watching the clips from the security camera Julian forgot he'd installed in the guest house, the one he thought was disconnected. I didn't tell her that I was no longer a wife, or a friend, or a victim. I was a witness. As I walked her to the door, my side flared again. I leaned against the doorframe, a bead of sweat breaking on my forehead. "Are you okay, Elle?" Claire asked, her hand hovering near my arm. "I'm fine," I said, forced air through my teeth. "I'm just tired of carrying things that don't belong to me." She frowned, a small wrinkle of confusion appearing between her perfectly groomed brows. "Well, get some rest. We have a lot of planning to do for the party." I watched her walk down the driveway, her stride confident and lithe. She didn't have any broken ribs. She didn't have a husband who looked at her with contempt. She had everything of mine that she wanted. I closed the door and turned the deadbolt. The click echoed through the empty hallway. I walked to the kitchen, picked up the hydrangeas she had brought, and walked them to the trash can. I didn't drop them in. I pushed them down, feeling the stems snap under my palm. The anniversary party was in 21 days. 21 days to breathe through the pain. 21 days to be the silent, grateful wife. I went back to the sink and began to scrub the teacups. I scrubbed until the porcelain was hot, until my fingers were raw, and until the image of their faces, laughing in the guest house, was burned into the back of my eyelids. They wanted a celebration. I would give them a revelation. The next morning, the sun was too bright. It sliced through the gaps in the heavy velvet curtains of our bedroom, landing right across my eyes like a summons. I lay still for a long time, listening to the house. Julian was already in the shower. I could hear the rhythmic thrum of the pipes behind the headboard. It was a sound that used to comfort me, a signal that the day had begun and we were safe in our routine. Now it sounded like a countdown. I rolled onto my side, a move that required a 3-stage breath to manage the fire in my ribs. On my nightstand sat a bottle of high-strength ibuprofen and a glass of water that had grown stale overnight. Julian had placed them there before he went to sleep. To anyone else, it would look like the act of a devoted husband. To me, it was the act of a man maintaining his equipment. He needed me functional enough to keep the house running, but quiet enough not to be a nuisance. By the time I made it downstairs, Julian was already at the breakfast table, scrolling through his tablet. He didn't look up when I entered. "The dry cleaner called," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth he'd used with Claire the day before. "They can't get the wine stain out of my gray suit. You should have taken it in immediately instead of letting it sit for 3 days." "I was in the hospital 3 days ago, Julian," I said softly, reaching for the coffee pot. My hands shook, the weight of the ceramic carafe pulling at the muscles in my side. He finally looked up, his eyes cold and analytical. "And whose fault was that? If you hadn't been snooping where you weren't invited, you wouldn't have tripped. Let's not rewrite history, Elena. It's beneath you." He didn't mention the push. He never did. In his mind, his hand had never touched me. My own instability had caused the accident. This was his greatest gift, the ability to edit reality until he was the only protagonist left standing. "I'll buy you a new suit," I said, staring at the dark swirl of coffee in my mug. "Don't bother. I'll have Claire pick one out this afternoon. She has a better eye for the modern cuts anyway. You tend to lean toward the traditional." The word traditional felt like a polite way of saying obsolete. I didn't argue. I had learned that arguing with Julian was like trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. He would simply drift away, leaving me grasping at nothing, feeling foolish and hysterical. Around noon, my son Marcus stopped by. Marcus was 32, a junior partner at a law firm, and the pride of Julian's life. He walked into the kitchen with the same entitled stride as his father, tossing his car keys onto the marble island I had just wiped clean. "Hey, Mom. Dad said you took a spill?" Marcus headed straight for the fridge, pulling out a carton of orange juice and drinking from it. "Something like that," I said, leaning against the counter to take the weight off my hip. "How are things at the firm?" "Busy. Stressed. I'm handling the Henderson merger now." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and finally looked at me. "You look tired, Mom. Maybe you should look into one of those assisted living brochures Dad was mentioning. Just for the future. This house is a lot of stairs for someone who can't stay upright." The air left my lungs. "Assisted living? I'm 58, Marcus. I'm not an invalid." Marcus sighed, the sound of a man burdened by a difficult child. "Dad's just worried. He said your memory has been spotty lately, too. You forgot his sister's birthday? That's not like you." I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. Julian wasn't just hiding an affair. He was laying the groundwork for my erasure. He was telling our children I was failing, mentally and physically. He was building a cage out of concern, and Marcus was helping him tighten the bolts. "I didn't forget," I said, my voice trembling. "I sent her a card a week early."
"Right. Whatever you say."
Marcus checked his watch.
"Look, I gotta run. Claire's meeting me for lunch to discuss the surprise toast for the anniversary. Try not to fall down any more stairs, okay?"
He kissed the top of my head, a distracted, obligatory gesture, and was gone. He hadn't noticed the way I winced when he touched me. He hadn't noticed that I was holding my side. He only saw what his father had told him to see, a woman who was becoming a liability. After he left, I went to the basement. The basement was my domain.
It was where the laundry lived, where the old photo albums were stored, and where Julian rarely ventured because it was drafty. In the far corner, behind a stack of winter blankets, sat my old laptop, the one Julian thought was broken. I sat on a hard plastic crate, the cold of the concrete floor seeping into my bones, and opened the lid. The screen flickered to life, the blue light illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I opened the folder marked Garden Designs. Inside were 24 video files dated over the last 3 months. I clicked on the most recent one. The camera angle was high, tucked into the eaves of the guest house porch. The quality was graining but clear. It showed Julian and Claire. They weren't hiding. They were sitting on the porch swing, the one I had picked out for our 25th anniversary. Julian was laughing, a deep, genuine sound I hadn't heard in years. He leaned over and tucked a lock of hair behind Claire's ear. "She's getting suspicious." Julian's voice came through the small speakers, tinny but unmistakable.
"She's not suspicious, Julian," Claire replied, her voice smooth as cream. "She's just tired. Elena has always been a bit of a martyr. She likes the attention of being the injured party."
"It's exhausting," Julian sighed, resting his head back. "The silence, the sighs. I feel like I'm living with a ghost. I just want it to be over."
"Soon," Claire whispered, reaching out to take his hand. "After the party. We'll tell her then. It's the most merciful way. Give her one last big night, then we move on. You've given her 35 years of a perfect life. You don't owe her anything else."
I watched Julian nod. I watched him lean in and kiss her. It wasn't a hurried, guilty kiss. It was the kiss of a man who felt he had earned his reward. I sat there in the dark, the sound of their laughter looping in my head. One last big night. They wanted a grand finale. They wanted the 35th anniversary to be the closing curtain on the character of Elena, the devoted wife, so they could debut the new production of their lives together. They thought they were being merciful by letting me have my party before they discarded me. I closed the laptop. My ribs throbbed, a steady, rhythmic pulse of pain that felt like a ticking clock. I wouldn't tell Julian I'd seen the video. I wouldn't tell Marcus that his father was a liar. I wouldn't confront Claire when she came over tomorrow with more fabric swatches for the table runners. I would be the ghost they thought I was. I would be the silent, fading woman they discussed with such pity. I would let them plan their mercy, while I planned my own. I stood up, my side screaming, and carried a basket of Julian's laundry up the stairs. I folded his shirts with precision. I ironed the collars until they were sharp enough to cut. I performed the role of the invisible woman perfectly. But as I placed his newly ironed shirt in his closet, I looked at the gray suit he'd complained about. I took a small pair of sewing scissors from my pocket and, hidden beneath the lining of the inner pocket, I made a tiny, jagged cut, just enough to be felt but not seen, a small irritation, a tiny tear in the fabric of his perfection. It was only the beginning. The local grocery store had always been my social terrain. For 30 years, I was the woman who knew which apples were the crispest and which cashier's son was struggling in algebra. But on Thursday, as I pushed my cart through the produce aisle, the terrain had shifted. I saw Sarah Higgins, a woman I'd shared PTA meetings and neighborhood watch luncheons with for decades, near the organic kale. Usually, Sarah would stop to gossip for 20 minutes. This time, she saw me, and her expression didn't brighten. It softened into that look, the one you give a terminal patient or a three-legged dog.
"Elena dear," she whispered, stepping closer and touching my forearm with a lightness that felt patronizing. "It's so good to see you out. Julian mentioned you've been having a difficult time lately. Some confusion?" The word confusion landed like a slap. I tightened my grip on the handle of the cart, the metal cold against my palms. "I'm just recovering from a fall, Sarah. My head is perfectly clear." Sarah gave me a sad, tight-lipped smile, the kind you give a child who insists their imaginary friend is real. "Of course, honey. But if you ever need a ride to the doctor, or if you find yourself, well, if you lose your way, you just call me, okay? Julian is so worried about you leaving the stove on." I felt the blood drain from my face. I hadn't left a stove on in my life. Julian was seeding the neighborhood with the narrative of my decline, ensuring that if I ever spoke the truth, it would be dismissed as the ramblings of a fading mind. He wasn't just stealing my husband and my best friend. He was stealing my sanity in the eyes of the world. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to me. I turned my cart and walked away, my ribs throbbing with every step, the weight of the confusion narrative feeling heavier than the groceries I was carrying. When I got home, Claire's car was in the driveway. She was inside, standing in the foyer, holding a large, minimalist ceramic vase that looked like a jagged piece of gray stone. It was cold, modern, and utterly unlike anything in our home. "I thought the foyer needed a refresh for the party," Claire said, already moving toward the antique pedestal where my mother's hand-painted porcelain vase sat. "This one is much more contemporary. It matches the new direction Julian wants for the house." The new direction. She wasn't just talking about decor. "That vase belonged to my mother, Claire," I said, my voice thin. Claire paused, the gray stone vase in her hands. She looked at me with a practiced, sympathetic tilt of her head. "I know, Elena, but it's chipped at the base. It's a trip hazard, and it looks a bit cluttered. Julian said you were looking to simplify. We can put it in the attic for safekeeping." She didn't wait for my permission. She set her new, ugly vase down and picked up my mother's porcelain, cradling it like a relic of a bygone era. I watched her, the woman I had trusted with my deepest fears, as she systematically removed my history from my own hallway. I thought about the video on the laptop, the way she had sat in the guest house, talking about my martyrdom. "Put it in the attic, then," I said, my voice a whisper of its former self. "If that's what Julian wants." "It's for the best," she said, giving me a quick, dry kiss on the cheek as she passed me. "You'll see. Everything will be so much lighter once we're done." I stood in the foyer, staring at the gray stone vase. It looked like a tombstone. That evening, the physical pain was becoming unbearable. The fall was 5 days ago, and the bruising had turned a deep, sickly purple-yellow, spreading across my torso like a map of a war zone. Julian noticed me flinching as I set the table for dinner. You're still struggling, he said, pulling out his chair. He didn't offer to help me with the heavy serving platter of roast chicken. I talked to Dr. Aris. He called in a prescription for something stronger to help you sleep. You're not resting, Elena. That's why you're so edgy. I don't need more pills, Julian. I need time to heal. You need to do what you're told, he said, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous register that signaled the end of the discussion. I can't have you looking like a ghost at the anniversary party. It reflects poorly on me. People will think I'm not taking care of you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small orange bottle. He shook out a single white pill and placed it on the tablecloth next to my wine glass. Take it after dinner. I want to make sure you actually swallow it this time. No more forgetting. I looked at the pill. It sat there, small and innocent, a chemical tether designed to keep me sedated while he and Claire finalized the details of my replacement. I felt a surge of cold, sharp terror. If I took it, I would sleep through the night. But what would happen while I was under? What papers would he put in front of me? What episodes would he recount to Marcus the next morning? We ate in a silence so thick it felt like we were underwater. The only sounds were the scrape of silverware against china and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Julian ate with a vigorous appetite, a man satisfied with the progress of his day. I moved the food around my plate, my stomach twisting. After he finished, he stood up and watched me. The pill, Elena. I picked it up. My fingers felt numb. I put it in my mouth and took a sip of wine. He watched my throat as I swallowed. Good girl, he said, patting my hand. His skin felt like parchment, dry and lifeless. Now, go to bed. I have some work to finish in the study. Claire might stop by later to drop off the guest list, so don't be alarmed if you hear the door. I won't be alarmed, I said. I climbed the stairs, the pain in my ribs a sharp, jagged reminder of the reality he was trying to drug out of me. I went into the bathroom, and as soon as the door was locked, I leaned over the sink. I hadn't swallowed the pill. I had tucked it under my tongue, a trick I'd learned from my father when he was in the hospice. I spat the white tablet into the drain and watched the water wash it away. I didn't turn on the light in the bedroom. I lay on top of the covers in the dark, my eyes wide, listening. An hour passed, then 2. I heard the soft click of the front door, low voices in the foyer, Julian's deep murmur, followed by Claire's melodic, practiced laugh. They didn't go into the study. I heard the back door open, the one leading to the garden toward the guest house. I stood up, my body protesting every movement, and crept to the window. I pulled back the curtain a fraction of an inch. In the moonlight, I saw them. They were walking across the lawn, Julian's arm draped heavily around Claire's shoulders. They weren't hiding anymore. Why would they? They thought the crazy, confused wife was upstairs, drugged into a stupor, safely tucked away in the cage they had built for her. I watched them disappear into the guest house. A moment later, the light in the upper window flickered on. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the urge to scream. Instead, I felt a strange, icy clarity. Julian thought my silence was the result of the pill. He thought my compliance was the result of my confusion. He didn't realize that I was finally wide awake. I walked over to the vanity and picked up my phone. I didn't call the police, not yet. I opened the camera app and looked at my own reflection. I looked old. I looked hurt. But behind the exhaustion, there was a spark of something Julian hadn't seen in 35 years. I began to record. Day 5, I whispered to the lens. Julian thinks I'm asleep. Claire is in the guest house.
My fourth and fifth ribs are broken. He says I fell. I remember the desk hitting my chest. I remember him looking at me like I was a broken glass he had to sweep up. I saved the video to a hidden cloud drive. Tomorrow, I would go to the bank. Tomorrow, I would see exactly how much of our money had been moved into accounts I didn't recognize. But tonight, I would listen to the silence of the house they were trying to steal from me. The anniversary was 2 weeks away. I wondered if the gray stone vase in the foyer was heavy enough to break if it fell.
Or perhaps it was better to let it sit there, a monument to the woman they thought I had become, until the moment I decided to show them who I actually was. Friday morning arrived with a deceptive softness. The light filtered through the trees outside our bedroom window, casting dancing shadows across the duvet. Julian was already dressed, standing before the full-length mirror, adjusting his tie with the precision of a man preparing for a victory. He looked vibrant. I, meanwhile, felt like a collection of porcelain shards held together by nothing but sheer will and a tight medical wrap around my torso. "You look remarkably clear-eyed this morning," Julian remarked, catching my reflection in the mirror. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He was talking to the version of me he had created in his mind. "The medication clearly agreed with you. No more wandering the halls at midnight, I hope?" "I slept very deeply," I lied, my voice steady. "Thank you for the help, Julian." He smiled, a quick, sharp expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Your health is my primary concern. In fact, I've been thinking, until you're fully recovered, it might be easier for you to stay in the downstairs guest suite. Fewer stairs to navigate. It's safer. I've already moved a few of your essentials down there this morning." The exclusion was being framed as an act of gallantry. He was evicted me from our marital bed, not with an argument or a suitcase thrown onto the lawn, but with safety and convenience. He was moving me into the periphery of my own life, one room at a time. "That's very thoughtful," I said. My heart was hammering against my fractured ribs, each beat a dull thud of panic. "But I prefer our bed. I'm sure I can manage the stairs slowly." Julian turned then. The tie was perfect. "Elena, let's not be difficult. It's already done. Claire helped me move your vanity items before she left last night. We just want you to be comfortable." Claire. She had been in my bedroom. She had touched my perfume bottles, my brushes, my jewelry, while I was supposedly unconscious. The thought made my skin crawl. She was already practicing for the role, trying on the life I had spent 35 years building. "I see," I said. I didn't fight him. I knew that resistance only fed his narrative of my instability. I simply sat on the edge of the bed and watched him gather his briefcase. Once I heard his car pull out of the driveway, I didn't go to the guest suite. I went to the garage. Driving was painful. Every turn of the steering wheel sent a jolt of electricity through my side, but I had a window of time that I couldn't afford to waste. The bank was a quiet local branch where the manager, Mr. Henderson, had known us for decades. He was a man who valued discretion and legacy, two things Julian used to manipulate him. "Mrs. Sterling," Henderson said, his voice lowering as he led me into his office. "A pleasure to see you. Julian mentioned you might be taking a little sabbatical from the household finances while you recover." "Julian mentions a lot of things, Arthur," I said, sitting carefully in the leather chair. "But as you know, the Sterling Trust requires dual signatures for any withdrawal over $10,000. I'm here to review the recent ledger." Henderson looked uncomfortable. He adjusted his glasses, avoiding my gaze. "Well, Elena, As Julian explained, there was the matter of the power of attorney you signed last month during your health scare.
I froze. I signed no such thing.
It was witnessed by Claire Vance, Henderson said softly, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. And notarized. It gives Julian full administrative control over the joint accounts and the trust, citing your progressive cognitive decline as the reason for the transfer of authority.
I looked at the signature. It was mine.
Or rather, it was a perfect imitation of mine, perhaps signed while I was groggy from the iron supplements Julian had been insisting I take for weeks before the fall. The date was 3 days after my mother's funeral, a time when I was a shell of a human being, grieving and vulnerable. I looked at the ledger. Over the last 6 months, nearly $200,000 had been moved, not to Claire, but to a holding company called Lumen Designs.
What is Lumen Designs? I asked, my voice barely a whisper.
It's a boutique architectural firm, Henderson said. Julian is a silent partner. They specialize in high-end residential renovations. Most of the capital has been used for property acquisitions in the valley.
I knew that valley. It was where Claire had always dreamed of living. Julian wasn't just planning to leave me. He was using my inheritance, the money my father had left specifically for my security, to build a nest for him and my best friend. He was liquidating my life to pay for theirs.
"Thank you, Arthur," I said, standing up. My head was spinning, but my movements were cold and precise. "I'd like copies of everything, for my records." "Of course," he said, though I could see the pity in his eyes. He thought he was helping a man manage a dying wife. When I returned home, Claire was in the kitchen. She had a set of blueprints spread out over the marble island, a highlighter in her hand. She looked up and smiled, and for a second, I saw it. The predatory hunger behind the mask of the loyal friend. "There you are," she chirped. "I was worried. You weren't in your new room. I've been looking at the designs for the anniversary gala. We're thinking of a winter reflection theme. Silver, white, lots of mirrors." "Mirrors," I repeated, walking toward the kettle. "How appropriate. Everyone can see themselves for who they really are." Claire's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Are you okay, Elena? You look a bit pale. Did you take your morning pill?"
"I'm fine, Claire. Just a bit of a headache." I turned to face her. "Tell me, how is the work going at Lumen Designs? Julian mentioned he was very excited about the new acquisitions in the valley." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a person. Claire didn't move. Her hand stayed frozen over the blueprints. The highlighter bled a small neon yellow circle into the paper. I didn't know Julian discussed his business ventures with you," she said, her voice losing its melodic lilt. "He usually likes to keep you away from the stress of the firm." "He's very protective of me," I said, a small, hollow smile touching my lips. "But we've been married 35 years. There aren't many secrets left between us. Don't you agree?" Claire regained her composure, but I saw the way her fingers gripped the edge of the counter. "Secrets are such heavy things, Elena. Sometimes it's a kindness to keep them from people who can't handle the weight." She was telling me I was weak. She was telling me I was a burden he had to carry. "I'm stronger than I look, Claire. My ribs are knitting back together quite nicely." "I'm glad to hear it," she said, though her eyes were darting toward the door, as if looking for Julian to come and reset the power dynamic. "Anyway, I should get these over to the caterer. We're finalizing the guest list tonight.
Julian wants to make sure all the right people are there to witness the anniversary. I'm sure he does, I said. I watched her pack up her blueprints. I watched the way she moved through my kitchen. The kitchen I had designed, where I had cooked 10,000 meals for a man who was now stealing the roof from over my head. After she left, I went to the downstairs guest suite. It was a cold, sterile room. My brushes and my perfume were lined up on the dresser, like items in a museum exhibit. My life had been moved into a box. I sat on the bed and pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the camera app and recorded a short video. Day 6, I said. He's moved me out of our bedroom. He's used a forged power of attorney to drain the trust. Claire knows that I know about Lumen Designs. The air in this house is getting harder to breathe, but I have to wait. 14 days until the party. I need to know one thing. Does Marcus know? If my son knows what his father is doing and is letting it happen, then I have nothing left to lose. I saved the video and tucked the phone under the mattress. I realized then that Julian hadn't just broken my ribs. He had broken the contract of my life. And a contract that has been voided by one party no longer binds the other. I looked at the iron supplement bottle Julian had left on the nightstand. I opened it and poured the contents into a small plastic bag. I would have them tested. I lay down on the guest bed, staring at the ceiling. The curiosity wasn't about whether they would betray me anymore. That was settled. The curiosity was about how far they were willing to go to ensure I didn't make it to the anniversary. I heard Julian's car pull into the driveway. I heard the front door open, followed by his heavy, confident footsteps. He didn't come to the guest suite to check on me. He went straight to the liquor cabinet, poured a drink, and I heard him dial a number. "She's asking about the valley," I heard him say, his voice muffled by the walls. "No, I don't know how she found out. We might need to move the timeline up, Claire. She's becoming unpredictable." I closed my eyes. The unpredictable wife was exactly what they should be afraid of. The guest suite felt like a waiting room in a terminal ward. The walls were a shade of beige that seemed designed to absorb hope, and the air held the faint metallic scent of disuse. I woke up on Saturday morning to the sound of laughter. Not from the house, but from the patio just outside my window. I pulled the curtain back an inch. Julian and Marcus were standing by the grill, a pair of tongs in Julian's hand. They looked so similar, the same broad shoulders, the same way they tilted their heads when they were making a point. They were discussing a property map spread out on the outdoor table. "It's a clean break, Dad," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp morning air. "The appraisal for the Sterling house came in higher than expected. Once the medical necessity is established, the sale can go through without any hiccups from her end." "And the facility?" Julian asked, flipping a burger with a nonchalant flick of his wrist. "Linden Heights. It's top tier. Memory care, 24-hour monitoring. She'll have the best care money can buy. It's what she needs, even if she doesn't realize it yet." I stepped back from the window, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it would shatter my remaining intact ribs. They weren't just planning to move on, they were planning to institutionalize me. My own son, the boy I had stayed up with through every fever, the man whose law school tuition I had insisted we pay in full, was discussing my disposal over a Saturday barbecue. The medical necessity was the forged power of attorney. They were going to use my fall and my confusion to prove I was no longer fit to manage my own life. The 35th anniversary party wasn't just a celebration of a marriage, it was a public farewell to my personhood. I didn't let them see me cry. I didn't have the luxury of grief anymore. I dressed in a high-collared blouse to hide the yellowing bruises on my neck and walked out onto the patio. The conversation stopped instantly. Marcus looked away,
fiddling with his watch, while Julian offered a smile that was so bright it felt like a threat. "Elena, you're up," Julian said. "We didn't want to wake you. You've been sleeping so much lately. It's that recovery process, I suppose." "I feel much better today, Marcus," I said, looking my son directly in the eye. "I was thinking of heading into the city. I have an appointment with my old florist for the party." Marcus finally met my gaze. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt? Hesitation? But it was quickly smoothed over by a professional mask of concern. "Mom, I don't think you should be driving. Dad said you had another episode last night. You shouldn't be behind the wheel until the doctors clear you." "What episode was that, Julian?" I asked, my voice as cold as a winter creek. Julian didn't blink. "You don't remember? You came into the kitchen around 2 a.m. looking for your mother. You were quite distressed, Elena. You thought it was 1994. He said it with such conviction, such gentle pity, that for a split second, I actually doubted myself. That is the poison of gaslighting. It makes you a stranger to your own memory. But then I remembered the cold click of the guest house light. I remembered the video on my phone. "How strange," I said softly. "I don't remember that at all." "That's exactly the point, Mom," Marcus said, stepping closer and putting a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, a silent command to comply. "We just want you safe. Why don't you go back inside? Claire is coming over with the caterers in an hour. You can help her with the menu if you feel up to it." I allowed myself to be led back into the house like a recalcitrant child. I sat in the sunroom, watching through the glass as they returned to their map. I knew I had to act, but I was a prisoner in a house where every exit was monitored. My car keys were gone. I'd checked the hook in the mudroom earlier. My credit cards were likely flagged. I was being financially and physically suffocated. An hour later, Claire arrived. She didn't come alone. She brought a man in a dark suit who she introduced as Dr. Eris's associate, a Dr. Thorne. Thorne didn't look like a doctor. He looked like a man who was paid to provide specific outcomes. He had a clipboard and a way of looking at me that made me feel like an insect under a microscope. "Elena," Claire said, her voice dripping with fake honey. "Dr. Thorne just wants to do a quick wellness check. Just a few questions to see how the healing is going. Julian is so worried about the gaps in your memory." They sat me down in the living room. Julian and Marcus stood in the doorway, a united front of masculine protection. Claire sat next to me, her hand resting on mine, a gesture of friendship that felt like a shackle. "Mrs. Sterling," Thorne began, his voice a low drone. "Can you tell me the current date?" "October 14th, I said. "And who is the president?" I answered. I answered every basic question perfectly. I saw Marcus shift uncomfortably. He wanted this to be easy. He wanted me to fail so he could feel justified in what he was doing. "Very good," Thorne said, scribbling something on his clipboard. "Now, can you tell me about the night you fell? What were you doing just before you lost your footing?" I felt the air in the room thicken. Julian's eyes were fixed on mine, a silent warning. I was looking for a book," I said, my voice wavering. "In Julian's study. I tripped on the rug." "And did anyone push you, Elena?" Claire asked, her voice a whisper, as if she were guiding me toward a secret. "You mentioned something about a shadow to Julian that night. Do you remember seeing someone?" She was feeding me the narrative of a hallucination. If I agreed, I was crazy. If I denied it, I was forgetting my own previous claims. It was a trap with no exit. I don't remember a shadow, I said. I just remember the pain. Thorne nodded, looking at Julian. Common with traumatic brain injuries, the mind often suppresses the immediate lead-up to the event. I'd like to start her on a mild course of cognitive stabilizers. It should help with the evening agitation. Cognitive stabilizers meant more drugs, more sedation, more episodes they could manufacture while I was incoherent. I don't want more medication, I said, standing up. My side flared, but I didn't flinch. I'm healing just fine. If you'll excuse me, I have things to prepare for the anniversary. I walked out of the room, my back straight, until I reached the hallway. Once I was out of their sight, I leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. I needed to get out, not just for an hour, but for good. But how do you escape a life when the people you love have turned it into a cage? I went to the guest suite and locked the door. I pulled my phone from under the mattress. I had one person I could call, someone Julian and Claire would never suspect. I dialed the number for my sister, Martha. We hadn't spoken in 5 years. Julian had convinced me she was toxic, a bitter woman who was jealous of our lifestyle. He had slowly pruned her from my life until she was nothing but a name on a Christmas card list. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. Hello? Her voice was raspier than I remembered. Martha, I whispered. It's Elena. I need you to listen very carefully. I don't have much time. Elena? Is everything okay? Julian said you were… Julian is lying, I interrupted. They're all lying. Martha, they're trying to put me away. I need you to come to the house on Tuesday. Don't call, don't tell anyone. Just be at the end of the driveway at 10 a.m. There was a long silence. I heard the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. I'll be there, Martha said. I hung up and hid the phone just as a knock came at the door. Elena? It was Marcus. Dad wants to know if you want chicken or fish for the gala. We're finalizing the order. I looked at the closed door. My son, the notary. My son, the man who was selling my house. Fish, Marcus, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Tell your father I'll have the fish. I sat on the bed and looked at the small orange bottle of iron supplements on the nightstand. I picked it up and walked to the ensuite bathroom. I didn't flush them this time. I took one and tucked it into a small velvet pouch inside my jewelry box. I needed evidence, and on Tuesday, I was going to get it. Sunday in our house had always been sacred. It was the day of heavy linens, slow-roasted lamb, and the sound of the grandfather clock echoing through a home filled with the people I loved. But this Sunday, the tradition was being held without me. I sat in the guest suite, the door slightly ajar, listening to the clink of silverware from the dining room, the room I had spent 30 years polishing into a sanctuary. I heard Claire's voice, bright and authoritative. The lemon zest really lifts the gremolata, don't you think, Julian? It's a recipe I picked up in Tuscany last spring. It's perfect, Claire, Julian replied. I could almost see his smile, the genuine one that reached his eyes. Elena always used too much rosemary. It made everything taste like a forest. I closed my eyes, my hand instinctively going to my ribs. For 3 decades, Julian had praised my lamb. He had told me the rosemary reminded him of his grandmother's garden. Now, in the span of a few weeks, my history was being rewritten. My tastes were being pathologized. My choices framed as errors that Claire was finally correcting. I wasn't invited to the table. Julian had told me earlier that The sensory overload of a full Sunday meal might trigger another dizzy spell. He had brought me a tray of plain toast and a cup of lukewarm tea, patting my hand with that terrifying antiseptic kindness before locking the door for my own safety. He hadn't realized that I'd kept a spare key to the guest suite hidden inside the lining of an old jewelry box I'd moved down. I waited until I heard the sound of the patio doors opening. They were taking their coffee outside. I slipped out of the room, my movements ghost-like. I didn't head for the kitchen. I headed for Julian's study. I knew he'd be careless today, bolstered by the presence of his son and his mistress. The study smelled of expensive tobacco and the leather-bound books Julian never read but kept for the aesthetic of intellect. On his desk sat a leather portfolio. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were the final plans for the anniversary gala. It wasn't just a party. The seating chart was color-coded. My name, Elena, was at the head table, but next to it was a small handwritten note in Julian's precise script. Seat Elena near the exit. Ensure Marcus is on her left to manage any disruptions. Claire to host from the center. They weren't just seating me, they were staging me. I was to be a prop, a visual piece of evidence of Julian's long-suffering devotion to his ailing wife. But beneath the seating chart was something far more devastating. It was a brochure for Linden Heights, the memory care facility Marcus had mentioned. Tucked inside was a pre-signed admission form. The reason for admission section was already filled out. Progressive early onset dementia. History of domestic accidents and evening hallucinations. Patient is a danger to self. The date for my admission was written in red, October 28th, the day after the anniversary party. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to lean against the mahogany desk. They were going to throw me a grand party, collect the accolades of the community for being a loyal, grieving family, and then drive me straight from the ballroom to a locked ward. They were going to celebrate 35 years of my life by burying me alive. I reached for my phone to photograph the document, but a sound from the hallway froze me. "Dad, where did you put the heavy-duty tape for the boxes?" It was Marcus. He was coming toward the study. I looked around the room. There was nowhere to hide. The study was a fortress of open space. I did the only thing I could. I grabbed a random book from the shelf, a heavy volume on Victorian architecture, and sat in the wingback chair by the window, turning my back to the door. The door creaked open. I held the book with a grip so tight my knuckles turned white. My ribs screamed in protest at the tension. "Mom?" Marcus's voice was hesitant. "What are you doing in here? Dad told you to stay in the suite." I turned slowly, letting the confusion settle onto my face like a veil. I allowed my eyes to look slightly unfocused, my hair a bit disheveled. "I was looking for the blueprints, Marcus," I whispered, my voice thin and wavering. "I need to make sure the nursery is ready. The baby will be here soon." I saw the flash of horror on my son's face. It was the look of a man seeing his worst fears confirmed, or perhaps the look of a man seeing the justification he needed. "Mom, the baby? I'm 32. There is no baby." He stepped into the room, his voice softening into that patronizing tone doctors use for the incurable. "You're in Dad's office. You shouldn't be here. You're confused again." "But the wallpaper," I said, letting a single tear track down my cheek. "We chose the bluebirds, didn't we?" Marcus sighed, a sound of profound, weary disappointment. He reached out and took the book from my hands. He didn't notice it was upside down. "Come on, Mom. Let's get you back to your room. I'll tell Dad you had a bad moment." He led me by the arm, his grip firm but gentle. As we passed the dining room, I saw Claire and Julian through the glass doors. They were laughing, Claire's head tilted back, her hand resting on Julian's chest. They looked like a couple in a jewelry commercial. Marcus saw them too. He tightened his grip on my arm and hurried me past, as if he were ashamed for me to see the life that was already continuing without me. Once back in the guest suite, Marcus stood in the doorway. "I'm going to bring you that new medication Dr. Thorne suggested. It'll help the voices stay quiet, Mom. Just trust us." "I trust you, Marcus," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "You're my son. Why would you ever do anything to hurt me?" He flinched. For a second, the mask of the professional lawyer cracked, and I saw the little boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. But then he swallowed, nodded once, and closed the door. I heard the lock click from the outside. I sat on the edge of the bed, the confused expression falling away to reveal a cold, hard mask of resolve. I had been a mother first and a woman second for 32 years. I had protected Marcus from his father's temper, from the world's cruelty, from his own failures. And in return, he was helping his father erase me so he could inherit a house and a clean conscience. I reached into my pocket. I hadn't photographed the admission form, but I had managed to snag something else from Julian's desk. A small, silver thumb drive labeled Lumen, Personal. I went to the ensuite bathroom and turned on the shower, letting the steam fill the room to muffle any sound. I sat on the toilet lid and pulled the small velvet pouch from my jewelry box, the one containing the iron supplement I'd hidden. I looked at the pill. It wasn't an iron supplement. I had spent the previous night researching every pill shape and color on the medical databases. This was a high-dose sedative hypnotic, typically used for severe agitation in late-stage dementia patients. It caused memory loss, lethargy, and, ironically, confusion. Julian wasn't just managing my decline, he was manufacturing it. I tucked the pill back into the pouch. The winter reflection gala was 12 days away. I had 12 days to remain confused. 12 days to let them believe the drugs were working and that my mind was dissolving into bluebirds and nursery wallpaper. On Tuesday, Martha would be at the end of the driveway. She was my only bridge back to the real world. I turned off the shower and stood in front of the steamed-over mirror. I wiped a small circle in the glass and looked at myself. The bruising on my chest was a dull, muddy brown now, but the fire inside was white hot. "One last big night," I whispered to the empty room. "I'll make sure it's one you never forget." I heard Julian's footsteps in the hallway. I quickly lay down on the bed and pulled the covers up to my chin, closing my eyes and slowing my breathing. The door opened. I felt his presence in the room, the cold, predatory weight of him. He stood over me for a long time. I could hear the faint clink of ice in his glass. "Sleep well, Elena," he murmured, his voice like silk over a blade. "Everything is being taken care of. You don't have to worry about a thing anymore." I waited until he left. I waited until the house went silent. Then, I reached under the mattress for my phone. I had one message from Martha. "Tuesday, 10 a.m. I'm bringing the car. Stay strong, Elle." I held the phone to my chest, the cold metal a reminder that I was still here. I was still Elena Sterling. And the architect was about to find out what happens when you try to tear down a foundation that's still standing. Tuesday morning arrived with a gray, persistent drizzle that blurred the edges of the manicured lawn. It was the kind of weather Julian hated. It muddied the lines of his architectural vision, but for me, it was a shroud. I watched from the guest suite window as Julian's sleek black sedan splashed down the driveway at 8:45 a.m. 10 minutes later, Marcus followed,
his SUV idling for a moment as he checked his reflection in the visor, likely preparing his sympathetic son face for the office. The house was finally empty, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. I didn't waste a second. I used the hidden key to unlock the suite door, my heart hammering against my ribs so loudly I feared it would bruise them further. My body was a map of pain, but my mind had never been sharper. I moved through the hallway, noticing small, invasive changes. A photograph of my wedding day had been moved from the center of the console to a shadowed corner. A vase of wilting lilies, flowers I'm allergic to, had been placed on the dining table. Claire was marking her territory with the subtle cruelty of a predator. I reached the mudroom and found my spare set of keys. Julian hadn't taken them. He'd simply hidden them in the back of the utility drawer, assuming I was too confused to look beyond the surface. I tucked the silver USB drive and the velvet pouch containing the sedative into my cardigan pocket. At exactly 10 a.m., a rusted silver Volvo pulled up to the edge of our long, winding driveway, staying just out of sight of the security cameras Julian had installed near the garage. I slipped out the side door and ran, or as close to a run as my broken body would allow. Each step was a jagged blade in my side. The damp air felt like a benediction on my skin. When I reached the car, the door swung open. Martha looked older. Her hair was a shock of white now, but her eyes were the same fierce, uncompromising blue I remembered from our childhood. "Elena," she breathed, her hands shaking as she reached for me. "My God, you look like a ghost." "There's no time for that, Martha," I said, sliding into the passenger seat, gasping for air. "I need you to take these. Don't go to the police yet. Julian has friends there, and Marcus is a rising star at the firm. They'll just call it a domestic misunderstanding." I handed her the velvet pouch. "This is what he's been giving me. He calls them iron supplements. It's a heavy-duty sedative for dementia patients. I need a lab to confirm it. Off the record." Then I handed her the USB drive. "And this?" "I haven't seen what's on it yet. It's labeled Lumen Personal. It's the firm Julian is using to drain my inheritance. I need you to find someone who can bypass the encryption, someone who doesn't know the sterling name." Martha gripped the items, her face hardening. I knew he was a cold bastard, Elle. But this is a slow-motion murder. "He doesn't want me dead," I whispered, looking back at the house, the beautiful, suffocating prison I had helped build. "He wants me erased. There's a difference." "Come with me, now," Martha urged, her hand on the gear shift. "We'll drive to the city. We'll find a lawyer who isn't in Marcus's circle." "No. If I leave now, they'll use the power of attorney to declare me a missing, vulnerable adult. They'll find me, and they'll put me in Linden Heights before I can show the world what they are. I have to go back. I have to stay for the anniversary." "You're risking your life, Elena." "I lost my life the moment Julian pushed me," I said. "Now, I'm just fighting for the truth." I stepped out of the car, the rain soaking through my thin sweater. I watched Martha drive away, the silver Volvo disappearing into the mist. I felt a terrifying sense of nakedness. For the first time in 35 years, I had a secret that didn't belong to Julian. I hurried back to the house, slipping through the side door and relocking it. I made it to the guest suite, tucked the keys back into the utility drawer, and crawled into bed, just as I heard a car door slam in the driveway. It was Claire. She was early. I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood, sharp, rhythmic, like a hammer. She didn't knock,
She walked right into the guest suite, holding a garment bag. "Elena, are you awake?" she asked, her voice light and artificial. I let my eyes flutter open, keeping my expression blank and slightly dazed. "Claire? Is it time for the nursery wallpaper?" Claire's lips curled into a tiny, satisfied smirk. She laid the garment bag across the foot of my bed. "No, darling. It's time for your final fitting. The dress for the gala arrived." She unzipped the bag. Inside was a gown of shimmering, icy silver. It was beautiful, but it was sleeveless and backless. "Julian picked it out," Claire said, running a manicured finger over the silk. "He says it highlights your fragility. He wants you to look like a piece of fine crystal." I looked at the dress. It was designed to show off every inch of my skin, the skin that was currently covered in the yellow and purple remnants of Julian's protection. "I can't wear this, Claire," I said, my voice trembling. This time, the fear was real. "The bruises, everyone will see." Claire stepped closer, leaning over me until I could smell the vanilla on her breath. She reached out and touched the edge of my collarbone, her fingers cold. "That's the point, Elena," she whispered. "Julian will tell everyone you had a tragic fall during one of your episodes. Seeing the bruises will make them pity you. It will make them admire him even more for standing by a woman who is so clearly falling apart. The visual evidence is the final touch." The psychological cruelty of it was breathtaking. They weren't just going to display me. They were going to use my physical injuries as a costume to enhance Julian's reputation. I was to be a living exhibit of my own victimhood, used to validate the lie that would eventually imprison me. "It's a beautiful dress," I said, forcing my voice to remain hollow. "Julian always did have such a good eye for detail." "He does," Claire agreed, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "He's already planning the renovations for the master bedroom. He wants to tear down the wall to the nursery, open it up, make it a suite for guests." For her. She was already renovating the space where I had rocked Marcus to sleep. "I'm sure it will be lovely," I said. After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the silver dress. It looked like a shroud. I realized then that they weren't just waiting for the anniversary to move me to the facility. They were using the party to build the public case for my insanity. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan, forgetting for a moment that I had given the evidence to Martha. My hand found something else. A small, crumpled receipt I'd picked up from Julian's study floor earlier. It was for a jewelry store in the city, dated 2 days ago. 1 diamond tennis bracelet, inscribed, "To see, for the new beginning, J." I held the paper until it was a damp pulp in my hand. They thought they were the architects of this ending. They thought I was the building being demolished. But they forgot that I was the one who laid the foundation. And if the foundation decides to shift, the entire structure comes screaming down. I looked at the silver dress and felt a cold, hard smile touch my lips. If they wanted me to be a piece of fine crystal, I would be exactly that. But crystal doesn't just look beautiful. When it breaks, it cuts. By Wednesday evening, the house had begun to transform. It wasn't just the decor, it was the frequency. The air felt agitated, vibrating with the arrival of florist catalogs, catering contracts, and the constant, rhythmic clicking of Claire's laptop as she sat at the kitchen island. They were no longer pretending I was the mistress of the house. I was the honored guest in my own home, a distinction that meant I was allowed to watch, but never to touch.
I sat in the armchair in the sunroom, a thick wool blanket draped over my lap, despite the warmth of the house. Julian insisted on the blanket. He told me my circulation was poor, another symptom of my failing health. "Elena, you've dropped your book again," Julian said, his voice a low, patient hum as he entered the room. He picked up the Victorian architecture volume from the floor and placed it back on my lap. He didn't look at me. He looked at the book as if he were tending to a piece of furniture that wouldn't stay level. "Thank you, Julian," I whispered. "I've asked Claire to handle the wine selection for the gala," he continued, walking to the window and adjusting the blinds. "I know you usually enjoy that, but the last time we did a tasting, you seemed so overwhelmed by the tannins. It's better this way." "Better this way," I echoed. He finally looked at me, his eyes searching my face for any spark of the woman who used to debate him on the merits of a Bordeaux. I kept my expression slack, my gaze fixed on a point just past his shoulder. I was becoming an expert at the 1,000-yard stare. "The movers are coming tomorrow," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "to take some of the excess furniture to the storage unit. We need the space for the dance floor. I've marked the items." My heart lurched. I knew what those marked items were without asking. My mother's vanity, the rocking chair where I'd spent countless nights with a colicky Marcus, the small, scarred desk where I'd managed the household accounts for 3 decades. He wasn't clearing space for a dance floor. He was clearing space for a life that didn't include my history. "Whatever you think is best," I said. Julian smiled, the cold, thin smile of a man who has successfully dismantled an opponent without firing a shot. He patted my knee and left the room. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I waited until I was certain Julian was in the basement before I pulled it out. It was a text from an unknown number. "The white pill is lorazepam and haloperidol mixed into a custom compound. High dosage. The USB contains thousands of wire transfers. He's not just building in the valley, Elle. He's liquidating everything. Even the house is listed for a private sale starting November 1st. Talk soon. M." I stared at the screen until the light dimmed. Haloperidol, an antipsychotic used for severe agitation and schizophrenia. He was drugging me with a chemical straitjacket to ensure the episodes I was having were visible to everyone at the party. And the house, the Sterling estate, the only home my son had ever known, was already on the market. Julian was planning to vanish with Claire and the money, leaving me in a locked ward paid for by a trust he had already hollowed out. The dependency was the trap. I had relied on him to be the strong one, the one who handled the complexities of our financial life, while I handled the emotional labor. Now, that labor was being used as evidence of my incompetence. I stood up, the pain in my ribs a dull, constant ache, and walked toward the kitchen. I needed to see Claire. I needed to see how the new began looked in the light of day. I found her in the pantry, organizing the artisanal crackers and imported olives she'd ordered for the gala. She was humming a tune, a light, airy melody that I recognized. It was the song Julian used to whistle when he was happy. "The storage unit will be full by tomorrow night," Claire said, not turning around. "Julian is so relieved to finally have a handle on the clutter, Elena. You've always been such a collector." "I like things with stories, Claire," I said, leaning against the doorframe. She turned then, a jar of expensive tapenade in her hand. Her eyes were bright, fueled by the adrenaline of the takeover. "Stories are just ghosts, darling. Julian needs a fresh start. He needs a home that reflects his success, not his obligations."
Obligations. That was what I was, a debt he was tired of paying. "You've been a very good friend to him, Claire," I said, my voice steady. "Most women wouldn't take on the burden of another woman's husband quite so thoroughly." The jar in Claire's hand wavered for a second. Her mask of cool professionalism slipped, revealing a flash of the jagged, insecure girl who had always been jealous of my perfect life. "I'm doing what's necessary, Elena. Someone has to look after him. Someone has to make sure he isn't dragged down by a house that's rotting from the inside out." "Is that what I am? Rot?" Claire stepped toward me, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You're a woman who doesn't know when to leave the stage. You should be grateful we're giving you a grand exit. Most people in your condition just fade away in a quiet room. We're giving you a party. We're giving you silver and silk. Don't be ungrateful." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt a strange, chilling pity. She thought she was winning. She thought that by stepping into my shoes, she was gaining my life. She didn't realize that Julian didn't love her. He loved the fact that she was a more efficient tool for his narcissism. Once the clutter of me was gone, she would be the next one marked for removal, the moment she became an obligation. "I'll try to be more appreciative," I said. I turned and walked back toward the guest suite. On the way, I passed the hall mirror, the one Julian hadn't replaced yet. I saw myself. I looked frail, yes. I looked like a woman who was losing her mind. But I also saw the way I was holding my side. I wasn't protecting my ribs anymore. I was holding the phone, the evidence, the truth. That night, Julian came into the guest suite to give me my pill. He watched me with a terrifying intensity as I put it in my mouth. I performed the swallow, the slight grimace, the heavy-lidded look of a person beginning to drift. "There's my girl," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. He didn't leave immediately. He sat on the edge of the bed and opened a folder on his lap. He thought I was already slipping into the chemical fog. He began to talk, not to me, but at me, as if he were practicing a speech. "Everyone will understand, Elena. They'll see the bruises at the party. They'll see you talking to the baby in the nursery. They'll see me holding your hand while you drift away. And when I announce that the house is too much for you, that we're moving you to a place where you can be safe, they'll call me a saint. I've earned this, Elle. I've earned a life that isn't heavy." He closed the folder and stood up. He didn't notice the way my hand was clenched under the duvet. He didn't notice that my eyes, though half closed, were tracing the shape of the folder he'd left on the nightstand for a moment, while he adjusted his watch. It was a contract for the private sale of the house. The buyer wasn't a person. It was Lumen Designs. He was selling our home to himself, using my money to buy out the equity, effectively laundering my inheritance into a clean, untraceable asset that he and Claire could walk away with. The imbalance was absolute. He had the law, the money, the sanity, and the sun. I had a sister in a rusted Volvo and a body that felt like it was made of glass. But as the door clicked shut and I spat the pill into my palm, I realized something Julian had forgotten in his architectural calculations. A building is only as strong as its foundation, and he had built his entire plan on the assumption that I was no longer there. I am still here. And I'm the only one who knows where the weight-bearing walls are. The moving truck arrived at 7 a.m. on Thursday, its engine a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards of the guest suite. I sat by the window, the wool blanket tucked around my legs,
and watched the men in blue jumpsuits descend like scavengers. They didn't look like villains. They looked like professionals, efficient, polite, and entirely indifferent to the history they were about to dismantle. Julian was already outside, a clipboard in his hand. He was in his element, directing the flow of labor with the same cold precision he used to design skyscrapers. He pointed toward the house, and the men followed his finger like soldiers. "Careful with the mahogany," I heard him say through the glass. "It's going to the long-term storage in the city. It won't be needed for the new layout." The mahogany was my grandfather's roll-top desk. It was the place where I had written every thank you note, managed every holiday card list, and kept the pressed flowers from Marcus's first graduation. To Julian, it was a piece of cumbersome furniture that didn't fit the winter reflection aesthetic. To me, it was the repository of my identity. I watched them carry it out. They had removed the drawers to make it lighter, and as they tilted it to get through the front door, a single forgotten postcard slid out from a hidden crevice and fluttered onto the damp grass. No one noticed. A moment later, a mover's boot stepped on it, grinding the image of a seaside town in Maine into the mud. "They're making so much room, aren't they, Elena?" I didn't turn around. I knew Claire's voice. She was standing in the doorway of the guest suite, holding a cup of herbal tea. She was dressed in an expensive yoga set, looking like a woman who had already spent the morning colonizing the master suite. "Room for what, Claire?" I asked, keeping my voice small and thin. "For the future," she said, walking into the room and setting the tea on my nightstand. She didn't ask if I wanted it. She just placed it there, a prop for her role as the caregiver. Julian says the house has felt crowded for years. All these old things, they hold on to too much dust. It's hard to breathe in a house that's full of yesterday. "I like yesterday," I whispered. "Yesterday, my ribs didn't hurt." Claire's expression didn't change, but her eyes flickered toward the medical wrap visible at the top of my nightgown. "Pain is just a memory the body hasn't let go of yet. Once you're settled at Linden Heights, you'll have professionals to help you forget the falls. You'll be much lighter then." She was no longer hiding the destination. She spoke of the facility as if it were a spa, a place where the burden of my memory would be surgically removed for my own comfort. Around noon, Marcus arrived. He looked exhausted. His tie was loosened and he carried a briefcase that seemed too heavy for him. He didn't go to see his father or Claire. He came straight to the guest suite. He sat on the edge of my bed, his head in his hands. "The paperwork is ready, Mom," he said, not looking at me. "The private sale of the house to Lumen. The closing is set for the 1st. I've made sure the trust is structured so your care at Linden is paid for life. You won't have to worry about a thing." "You're selling the house, Marcus?" I asked. I let a slight tremor enter my voice. "But where will you go for Christmas? Where will we put the tree?" Marcus flinched. He finally looked at me, and I saw the hollow, haunted look of a man who was trying to convince himself that a betrayal was actually a mercy. "Mom, we talked about this. The house is too big. Dad can't manage it and take care of you at the same time. He's moving into a smaller place in the valley, closer to his work. It's for the best." A smaller place in the valley. He couldn't even say the word house. He couldn't say with Claire. "Does Claire live in the valley?" I asked, my eyes wide and guileless. Marcus stiffened. "Claire is helping Dad with the transition. She's being very generous with her time. We should all be grateful she's stayed around to help us through this." "I'm very grateful," I said. I reached out and took his hand. His skin was cold. "You've always been such a good boy, Marcus. You always did exactly what your father told you to do." He pulled his hand away,
standing up abruptly.
I'm doing my job, Mom. I'm a lawyer. I look at the facts, and the facts are that you're falling, you're forgetting things, and Dad is drowning. I'm just trying to keep the family from sinking. He walked to the door, but before he left, he turned back. The caterers are coming for a final walkthrough this evening. Try to stay in your room. We don't want you getting confused and walking into the middle of the kitchen while they're setting up the stations. I'll stay right here, I promised. After he left, I waited. I waited until the sound of the moving truck faded into the distance. I waited until I heard the clink of wine glasses from the patio, Julian and Claire celebrating the clearing of the clutter. I stood up and walked to the closet. In the very back, hidden behind the silver gala dress, was my old leather handbag. I pulled out my phone. Martha had sent a new file. It wasn't a document, it was an audio recording. I put on my headphones and pressed play. It's not enough. Julian's voice came through, sharp and impatient. I recognized the background noise. It was the interior of his car. The appraisal was too low. We need the sterling jewelry collection included in the asset liquidation for the Lumen buyout. If we don't have that capital, the Valley House won't clear escrow. Elena will never give up those pieces, Julian, Claire's voice replied. The emeralds were her mother's. She wears them every anniversary. She won't have a choice, Julian said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, cold level of pragmatism. She's confused, remember? She misplaced them. By the time anyone looks for them, we'll be gone, and she'll be in Linden. Who's going to believe a dementia patient who claims her husband stole her jewelry? And Marcus? Claire asked. Marcus will do what he's told. He's too deep in the paperwork now. If he backs out, he's as liable for the administrative errors as I am. I've made sure of that. The recording ended. I sat in the silence of the guest suite, the tea Claire had brought me now stone cold on the nightstand. Julian wasn't just stealing my money and my home. He had leveraged our son's career to ensure his silence. He had turned Marcus into an accomplice to his mother's destruction. The psychological insight hit me then. Julian didn't build buildings. He built cages. And he had spent 35 years building one for me, only to realize he could fit Marcus inside it too. I looked at the silver dress hanging in the closet. It shimmered in the dim light, looking like a suit of armor. They wanted the emeralds. They wanted the final liquidation of my life to pay for their new beginning. I reached into my jewelry box and pulled out the emerald necklace. It was heavy, the stones a deep oceanic green. I didn't hide them. I put them on. I sat there in my nightgown, the emeralds glowing against my skin, and looked at myself in the vanity mirror they hadn't taken yet. The confused woman was gone. In her place was a woman who was finally seeing the architecture of her life for what it really was. I heard the front door open. The caterers had arrived. The house was filling with strangers, with mirrors, with the scent of a party that was meant to be my funeral. I took off the necklace and placed it back in the box, but I didn't lock it. I left it right on the dresser, a glittering piece of bait. I had 10 days. 10 days to let Julian think he had successfully compromised our son. 10 days to let Claire think she had won the house. But as I lay back down and closed my eyes, I thought about the postcard in the mud, the seaside town in Maine. I had family there too. And unlike the furniture in this house, some things are too heavy to be moved. Friday brought the scent of industrial-strength floor wax and the high-pitched hum of a professional steamer. The house was no longer a home. It was a stage set, and the winter reflection theme was being installed with a cold, silver efficiency. Huge, floor-to-ceiling mirrors were being wheeled into the ballroom, wrapped in protective foam that looked like bandages. I stood at the top of the stairs, invisible behind the heavy oak banister, and watched Claire direct the florists. She was holding a clipboard against her hip, pointing toward the mantel where my family photos used to sit. "Everything must be white or silver," Claire said, her voice sharp and ringing through the hollowed-out foyer. "No colors, no warmth. We want it to feel like a frozen moment in time, like a dream she can't quite wake up from." A dream she can't quite wake up from. She wasn't just talking about the decor. She was describing the state of my consciousness they were trying to induce. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my chest, feeling the sharp edge of a rib protest. I retreated to the guest suite, but the sanctuary was gone. Julian was inside, standing at my dresser. He had the jewelry box open. He didn't startle when I entered. He didn't even look up. He was holding the emerald necklace up to the light, the green stones flashing like the eyes of a cat. "I thought we'd put these in the safe deposit box, Elena," he said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly reasonable. "With the party coming up, and so many strangers in the house, it's not safe to leave them out. You know how you've been misplacing things lately." "I like to look at them, Julian," I said, my voice small. "My mother gave them to me on my wedding day. She said they were for depth." Julian finally looked at me. His face was a mask of weary, practiced patience, the kind a man uses when he's dealing with a broken appliance he's decided to replace. "Your mother had a flair for the dramatic, Elle. But depth is just another word for weight. You don't need weight right now. You need clarity." He began to lay the necklace into a velvet-lined travel case. "I'll take these to the bank this afternoon. I've already moved the diamond studs and the sapphire brooch. It's for the best." He was stripping me in broad daylight. He wasn't even waiting for me to be gone anymore. He was liquidating the physical evidence of my heritage right in front of my eyes, confident that my confusion would serve as a perfect veil for his theft. "Will I have them for the party?" I asked. "Claire said I was to look like crystal." "We'll see," Julian said, snapping the case shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "If the doctor thinks you're stable enough, we don't want you losing them on the dance floor and having a scene." He walked past me, the travel case tucked under his arm. He didn't offer a kiss. He didn't offer a get well. He was a man finishing a transaction. The emotional escalation hit me then, a cold realization that settled in my gut. Julian didn't just want the money. He wanted the satisfaction of watching me lose everything, while I was still conscious enough to feel the wind of it being pulled away. He wanted to be the last thing I saw before the chemical fog took me for good. That evening, I found Marcus in the kitchen. He was standing by the sink, staring out at the garden where the caterers were erecting a massive white tent. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "The emeralds are gone, Marcus," I said softly, standing behind him. He didn't turn around. His shoulders went rigid. "Dad said he was putting them in the vault, for safety." "Is that what he told you to say?" Marcus turned then, and I saw the hollowed-out terror in his eyes. He wasn't just a lawyer anymore. He was a man who had seen the ledge and realized he was already falling. "Mom, please, just go along with it. It's only a few more days. Once you're at Linden, you won't have to worry about jewelry or houses or any of this. It'll be quiet there. You'll be safe." "Safe from what, Marcus? From the truth? Or from the fact that my son helped his father steal my life?" Marcus stepped toward me, his voice a frantic whisper. "I didn't have a choice. Do you know what he's been doing?
The wire transfers, the Lumen accounts. He put my name on the secondary filings. If I go against him, if I expose him, I lose my license. I go to prison, Mom. He made sure of it. He's my father, and he's a monster. The psychological insight was devastating. Julian hadn't just broken me. He had corrupted the one thing I had left to love. He had used Marcus's ambition and his fear to create a human shield. My son wasn't choosing Julian over me. He was choosing his own survival over my soul. "We all have choices, Marcus," I said, my voice devoid of the warmth he used to rely on. "Even when we think we don't." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by the silver platters and the champagne flutes of a celebration he had sold his conscience to pay for. I went back to the guest suite and locked the door. I pulled the phone from its hiding place. I had one new message from Martha. It wasn't a text. It was a photo. It was a screenshot of a guest list Julian had finalized that afternoon. There was one name highlighted in red at the very bottom. A name I hadn't heard in 30 years. Dr. Silas Vane. Silas Vane wasn't an architect or a friend. He was the man who had signed my father's involuntary commitment papers 40 years ago. A man who specialized in discreet placements for wealthy families who had difficult members. Julian wasn't just throwing a party to show off my decline. He had invited the executioner to dinner. Dr. Vane wasn't there to celebrate 35 years of marriage. He was there to witness my episode and sign the final papers that would make my admission to Linden Heights irreversible.
I looked at the silver dress hanging in the closet. The winter reflection. I realized then that the curiosity wasn't about whether I could stop them. It was about whether I could survive long enough to turn the mirrors around. I sat on the bed and picked up the small white pill Julian had left for me on a saucer. It was the iron supplement, the haloperidol compound. I looked at it for a long time. Then, I didn't spit it out. I didn't hide it. I took a small piece of tissue and carefully wrapped the pill, tucking it into the hem of the silver gala dress. If Dr. Vane wanted to see a woman in the middle of a chemical breakdown, I would give him exactly what he wanted. But it wouldn't be me who was losing my mind. I heard Julian's laughter from the hallway, a rich, confident sound. He was happy. He was winning. He thought the foundation was settled. I lay down in the dark, the pain in my ribs a steady, rhythmic reminder of the night he pushed me. 9 days left. The stage was set. The mirrors were polished, and the monster was waiting in the wings. I closed my eyes and waited for the morning. A ghost in my own house, practicing my lines for a play they didn't know I was rewriting. Saturday brought a new kind of silence to the house, a clinical, reflective quiet. The winter reflection installation was nearly complete. Everywhere I looked, I saw myself. The foyer was lined with 6-foot mirrors in heavy silver frames, angled in a way that created an infinite corridor of Elena's. I saw the frail curve of my shoulders, the way I favored my right side to protect my ribs, and the hollowed-out expression Julian and Claire had worked so hard to cultivate. I stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by these reflections. In one mirror, I saw the caterers laying white silk over long tables. In another, I saw Claire standing on a ladder, hanging crystal droplets from the chandelier. The house felt doubled, tripled. a maze of silver and glass where the truth was just one more thing to be refracted and lost. It's a bit disorienting, isn't it? I didn't have to turn to know it was Julian. His reflection appeared in the mirror directly in front of me. He looked magnificent, rested, powerful, a man at the height of his influence. He stepped up behind me, and for a moment, the mirrors showed us as the couple we used to be, the architect and his muse. But when he reached out to adjust my cardigan, the illusion shattered. His touch was cold, a shepherd guiding a lamb toward the gate. "The mirrors are for the lighting, Elena," he whispered, his eyes meeting mine in the glass. "But they also help us see things we might otherwise miss, don't you think?" "I see everything, Julian," I said, my voice a practiced, airy drift. "Do you?" He tilted his head. "Dr. Vane is looking forward to meeting you. He's very interested in your history. He thinks a change of scenery, somewhere with structure and specialized care, is exactly what a woman of your depth requires." "Structure," I repeated. "Like a building." "Exactly," Julian said, patting my shoulder. "A building that's no longer safe for its inhabitants needs to be vacated. It's a matter of liability." The psychological insight hit me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just talking about the house. He was talking about my body, my mind. He had spent his career designing structures that were meant to last centuries, but he viewed his marriage as a temporary lease that had finally expired. I was the liability he was clearing from the books. Later that afternoon, I sat in the kitchen, watching Claire organize the silver-plated service sets. She was wearing a pair of emerald earrings, not mine, but a cheap, flashy imitation. It was a subtle taunt, a way of showing me that while Julian had stolen my heritage, he was giving her the aesthetic of it. "Julian says you're having trouble sleeping again," Claire said, not looking up from her task. She began to fill a small glass bowl with white pills, the iron supplements. There must have been 30 of them. "The mirrors make the night very bright," I said. Claire finally looked at me, and I saw the growing impatience in her eyes. She was tired of the charade. She wanted me in the car, she wanted the house sold, and she wanted the winter reflection to be over so she could start her life in the valley. "You need to take 2 tonight, Elena. Julian wants you rested for the final rehearsal tomorrow. We can't have you wandering into the mirrors and hurting yourself again." 2, I whispered. She pushed the bowl toward me across the marble island. "The dependency is for your own good. You're like a child now, Elle. You don't know what's best for you. Just trust the people who are still clear-headed." I took the 2 pills, feeling the cold weight of them in my palm. I didn't take them. I did the trick with the tissue again, hiding them in the pocket of my cardigan. The imbalance was so complete now that they didn't even bother to watch me swallow. They assumed the cumulative effect of the previous weeks had already eroded my will. Around dusk, Marcus came by. He didn't come to the kitchen. I found him in the garage, sitting in his car with the engine off, staring at the dashboard. He looked like a man who was drowning in shallow water. I opened the passenger door and sat down. The smell of leather and expensive cologne filled the small space, the smell of the life he was so afraid to lose. "The admission papers for Linden Heights are in your briefcase, aren't they, Marcus?" I asked. He didn't flinch. He just closed his eyes. "He made me do the notary work, Mom. If I don't file them by Monday, he'll release the internal audit of the Lumen accounts. He'll make it look like I was the one who authorized the transfers. I'll lose everything. My career, my house, my future." "And what about my future, Marcus?" "You don't have one," he snapped, turning to me with a sudden, jagged desperation. "Don't you see? You're already gone. The world thinks you're losing your mind. Dad has the medical reports, the witnesses, the accidents. There is no version of this where you win. If I go down with you, we both lose. If I help him, at least I can make sure you're in a nice place. At least I can visit you." The tension in the car was suffocating. I looked at my son, the boy I had protected from his father's coldness for 30 years, and I realized that he had become the very thing I had tried to save him from. He wasn't a victim. He was a coward. He was trading his mother's freedom for his own comfort, and he was calling it mercy. "Will you visit me on the anniversaries, Marcus?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "Will you bring me flowers and tell me about the house in the valley?" Marcus choked back a sob and turned away, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "Just take the medicine, Mom. Please, just make it easy." I got out of the car without another word. I walked back into the house, through the foyer of 1,000 reflections, and went to the guest suite. I pulled the silver gala dress from the closet. I felt the hem where I had hidden the first pill. I added the 2 from today. Julian, Claire, and Marcus, the 3 pillars of my life, had all decided that I was no longer a person. I was a problem to be solved, a ghost to be exorcised. They were so focused on the winter reflection they were creating that they hadn't noticed the girl in the mirrors was starting to move on her own. I reached under the mattress and pulled out my phone. One new message from Martha. "The encryption is broken. The Lumen files aren't just about the house, Elle. Julian is selling the structural blueprints of his firm's last 3 government contracts to a competitor. He's not just liquidating you, he's burning the whole bridge behind him. He's leaving on the 28th, alone. Claire isn't on the flight manifest, only Julian." I sat on the bed, the cold air of the room biting at my skin. Julian wasn't just replacing me with Claire. He was using Claire to help him steal the money, and then he was going to leave her behind too. He was the ultimate architect. He built the cage, and once the prey was inside, he moved on to the next site. The curiosity hook wasn't about whether I would tell Claire. She wouldn't believe me. She was too intoxicated by the idea of her new beginning. The curiosity was about what would happen when the mirrors were finally unveiled at the party. I heard Julian's footsteps in the hall. He was humming that tune again, the one about the fresh start. 8 days, Elena," he called through the door. "Almost time for the big night." I lay down and closed my eyes, the 3 pills in the hem of my dress a secret weight. I wasn't the one who needed to make things easy. I was the one who was going to make sure that when the winter reflection finally shattered, every single one of them would see exactly what they had become. Unresolved ending. I realized that if I was to survive the night with Dr. Vane, I couldn't just fake the symptoms of the drugs. I had to become the very thing they feared most, a woman who remembered everything. By Monday morning, the internal machinery of the Sterling household had begun to grind and seize. For 35 years, I had been the oil in the gears. I was the one who anticipated Julian's moods before they peaked, who softened the jagged edges of Marcus's temper, and who ensured that the domestic silence was a comfortable one, rather than a suffocating one. Now, I simply stopped. I sat in the kitchen, watching the faucet drip, one heavy, rhythmic splash every 4 seconds. Usually, I would have tightened the handle or called the plumber. Today, I just listened. The sound was like a pulse. Claire entered the kitchen at 9 a.m., her hair pulled back in a tight professional bun. She looked frayed. There were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of expensive concealer could quite mask. "Elena, why is the coffee not made?" she asked,
her voice carrying a sharp, impatient edge. "The florist is arriving in 20 minutes, and I have 3 separate calls with the rental company." I looked at her, tilting my head slightly. "The beans are in the pantry, Claire. I'm sure you can figure out the measurements. You've been practicing being the woman of the house for weeks now. Surely you can handle a percolator." The silence that followed was a cold, brittle thing. Claire's face flushed, a blotchy, angry red. "Don't be difficult, Elena. You know the doctor said you shouldn't be handling hot liquids if you're feeling unsteady." "I feel perfectly steady," I said, my voice a flat, dead calm. "It's the house that seems to be tilting." I stood up and walked past her, purposefully brushing my shoulder against hers. I felt her flinch. For the first time, I wasn't the one retreating. I was the solid object, and she was the one vibrating with a growing, invisible instability. The household labor I had provided, the constant, invisible tending to Julian's ego and the house's needs, was a structural support they had taken for granted. Without it, the winter reflection was starting to feel like a warehouse rather than a home. Julian was snapping at the caterers. The laundry was piling up in the basement because I forgot how the new high-tech dryer worked. The mail sat in a mountain on the foyer table because I no longer cared to sort the bills from the invitations. I went to the ballroom. The mirrors were fully unveiled now. They stood like silver sentinels around the perimeter of the room. Julian was there, standing in the center, hands on his hips, looking at his reflection. "The lighting is off," he muttered, not acknowledging me. "The shadows are too long in the corners. It makes the room look cavernous." "Maybe it is cavernous, Julian," I said, standing in the doorway. "Maybe there's just nothing left to fill the space." He turned, his eyes narrowing. "What is that supposed to mean?" "The house is empty," I said, gesturing to the space where my mother's vanity once sat. "You've cleared out the clutter, but you forgot that the clutter was what held the sound in. Now every word we say just bounces off the glass. It's very loud in here, don't you think?" Julian stepped toward me, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You're being provocative, Elena. It's a symptom of the agitation Dr. Thorne warned us about. You're trying to create a conflict because you can't handle the transition. I suggest you go back to your room before you say something you'll regret when you're clearer." "I don't think I'll be clearer than I am right now," I said. I turned and left him there, surrounded by a dozen versions of himself, all looking equally frustrated. The psychological shift was intoxicating. By withdrawing my emotional labor, by refusing to be the confused victim he could manage, I was forcing him to confront the vacuum he had created. In the afternoon, I saw Claire in the garden. She was on her phone, pacing the length of the white tent. Her voice was a frantic whisper. "I don't care about the escrow. I want to know why my name isn't on the title for the Valley property yet. Julian said the paperwork was being filed today. No, I'm not being difficult. I'm being careful." I watched her from the sunroom. She was finally starting to feel the wind. She thought she was the architect's partner, but she was beginning to realize she was just another subcontractor. I thought about the message from Martha. Julian is leaving on the 28th, alone. I felt a strange, detached curiosity. Would she find out before the party? Or would she stand there in her silver dress, smiling at the guests, never realizing that the man she had helped destroy me was already halfway out the door with the money she had helped him steal? "Mom?" Marcus was standing behind me. He looked smaller than he had a week ago. He was holding a stack of documents. "The final walkthrough for the Linden Heights admission is tomorrow," he said, his voice trembling. "They need you to sign the voluntary waiver. Dad says if you sign it now, we can skip the formal evaluation by the state board. It'll be private. No one has to know. Voluntary, I whispered. I turned to look at my son. Do you know what happens to the things that are voluntary, Marcus? They become the things we regret most when we're alone. Mom, please, just sign it. I can't keep doing this. He's losing his patience. He says if the house sale doesn't clear because of your interference, he's going to make sure my bar complaint goes through. He has the files, Mom. He has the recordings of me notarizing the forged power of attorney. The betrayal was a circle. Julian had used Marcus to trap me, and now he was using that very trap to keep Marcus silent. He had created a family where everyone was a hostage to everyone else's sins. Give me the pen, Marcus, I said. His eyes lit up with a pathetic, desperate hope. He handed me the fountain pen, the one I had bought him when he passed the bar. I took the document. I looked at the line where my name was supposed to go. Elena Sterling. I didn't sign it. Instead, I drew a small, perfect circle in the center of the page. There, I said, handing it back to him. That's the shape of our family, Marcus. A 0. No beginning, no end, and nothing in the middle. Marcus stared at the paper, his face turning a ghostly white. He's going to kill me. He's going to ruin me. He already did, I said. I walked out of the room, leaving him with his circle. The instability in the house was now a physical presence. It was in the way Julian slammed the cupboard doors, the way Claire's laughter sounded like breaking glass, and the way the mirrors in the ballroom seemed to grow colder by the hour. That evening, Julian didn't bring me the pill. Claire did. She didn't say a word. She just set the saucer on the nightstand and walked out, her eyes red from crying. I picked up the pill. It was the 4th one. I walked to the silver gala dress and tucked it into the hem right next to the others. The curiosity hook was no longer about the jewelry or the house. It was about the revelation. Julian thought he was building a winter reflection to hide the truth. He didn't realize that when you surround yourself with mirrors, the only thing you can't hide is yourself. I sat on the bed and looked at the clock. 6 days. The house was failing. The family was hollow. And for the first time in 35 years, I was the only one who wasn't afraid of the dark. I heard Julian and Claire arguing in the foyer, a muffled, ugly sound of 2 people realizing they didn't trust the ground they were standing on. I lay back and smiled. The silence I had maintained for decades was finally over. Now, it was their turn to be quiet. Unresolved ending. I realized that I didn't need to defeat Julian. I just needed to wait for the house he had built to realize it no longer had a foundation. But as I drifted off, I heard a sound I hadn't expected. The sound of Julian's study door being locked from the inside. The night of the Winter Reflection Gala was a masterpiece of cold, silver light. The house didn't look like a home, it looked like a frozen cathedral. Hundreds of mirrors caught the flicker of $1,000 candles, creating a shimmering, disorienting labyrinth. The guests, the elite of the city, the business partners, the silent observers, moved through the foyer in hushed awe, their own reflections trailing behind them like ghosts. I stood at the top of the stairs, wearing the silver silk dress. I hadn't used makeup to cover the bruises. I had told the artist to leave them, the faded yellow on my collarbone, the deep purple shadow near my ribs. I wanted them to be the only color in this colorless world. In my pocket, I felt the small velvet pouch. It held all 14 pills I had hidden over the last 2 weeks. You look haunting, Julian whispered, appearing at my side. He was in a tuxedo that cost more than a mid-sized car. He looked at my bruises and smiled, a predatory gleam in his eye. Perfect. You look exactly like a woman on the edge of a collapse. Don't forget your lines, Elena. Just be confused. I'll handle the rest. I know exactly what to do, Julian, I said. We descended the stairs together. I saw Claire near the champagne tower, wearing her cheap emeralds and a triumphant grin. I saw Marcus near the bar, his face the color of ash, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. And I saw Dr. Silas Vane, a man with a clinical, unblinking gaze standing by the mirrors, already scribbling notes on a small pad. The party was a blur of polite whispers. Poor Elena, I heard them murmur. She looks so frail. Did you hear about the falls? Julian is a saint for keeping her at home this long. Julian led me to the center of the ballroom for the toast. He raised his glass, the light from the chandeliers shattering against the crystal. 35 years, Julian began, his voice booming with a warm, practiced sincerity. A marriage is like a building. It requires a foundation of trust and a structure of care. But sometimes, even the strongest foundations begin to crumble. My dear Elena has been facing a difficult journey lately, a journey into the shadows of the mind. Tonight, as we celebrate our history, I also want to ask for your support as we move into a new phase, one where Elena can get the specialized care and safety she deserves. The room went silent. Doctor. Vane stepped forward, his eyes locked on mine. This was the moment. The episode was expected now. I looked at Julian. I looked at the man who had broken my ribs, stolen my inheritance, and tried to bury me in a locked ward. I looked at Claire, who was waiting for the keys to my life. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out the velvet pouch, and emptied the 14 white pills onto the silver platter a waiter was holding next to us. Julian, I said, my voice ringing out with a clarity that cut through the room like a blade. I think you dropped your iron supplements. The ones you've been giving me every night to make me sleep. The ones that Dr. Thorne says are actually high-dose antipsychotics for the violently insane. The silence in the room turned from polite to deafening. Julian's smile didn't just falter, it evaporated. Elena, you're confused, he hissed, reaching for my arm. You're having a hallucination. Am I? I turned to the room, to the mirrors, to the 100 versions of my broken body. Is it a hallucination that Julian is selling this house to a shell company called Lumen Designs? Is it a hallucination that he has a private flight booked for the 28th to a country with no extradition, a flight that has only one seat, not even a seat for you, Claire? Claire's glass hit the floor. The sound of shattering crystal was the only thing louder than the gasp of the crowd. She looked at Julian, her eyes wide with a sudden, dawning horror. What is she talking about, Julian? Claire whispered. The Valley House. The title. She's crazy! Julian shouted, his face contorting into the mask of rage I knew so well. He turned to Dr. Vane. Doctor, sign the papers. Look at her. She's hysterical. She's attacking me. But Dr. Vane wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the pills on the silver platter. He was looking at the bruises on my neck that Julian's protection had left behind. Mr. Sterling, Dr. Vane said, his voice cold and professional. I was told your wife was non-functional. She seems remarkably coherent. However, you You seem to be experiencing a significant loss of emotional control. Marcus, Julian roared, turning to our son. Tell them she's losing it. File the audit. Marcus stepped forward. He looked at the 0 I had drawn on the paperwork earlier. He looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time in years. He saw the mother who had taken the hits so he wouldn't have to. Marcus pulled a manila envelope from his jacket. I can't, Dad. What? Julian's voice cracked. I've already filed the audit, Marcus said, his voice trembling but growing stronger. With the district attorney and the FBI. I included the recordings of the wire transfers to Lumen and the security footage from the guest house. He looked at the guests. My father didn't protect my mother. He manufactured her decline to fund his escape. And I helped him. I'm here to give my statement. The collapse was instant. Julian lunged for Marcus, but the friends he had invited, the powerful men who valued their own reputations above all else, stepped in. They didn't see a saint anymore. They saw a liability. As the police, who had been waiting in the driveway at Martha's signal, entered the ballroom, the winter reflection finally fulfilled its purpose. Julian saw himself. He saw himself in 100 mirrors. A man shouting, sweating, being led away in handcuffs. His perfect architecture falling in on his head. Claire was left standing by the champagne. A woman who had traded her soul for a house that was already being seized. I walked to the foyer, past the mirrors, past the ghosts. Martha was waiting at the door. You okay, Elle? She asked. I looked back at the ballroom. It was cold, silver, and empty. The structure was gone. The foundation was destroyed. I'm fine, Martha, I said. I just realized something.
What's that? I looked at the silver dress, then down at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. The best thing about a house falling down, I whispered, is that for the first time in 35 years, I can finally see the sky. I walked out the door and didn't look back. Behind me, the mirrors of the Sterling estate remained, reflecting nothing but the dark, quiet rooms of a man who thought he could design a cage for a woman who was already the wind.